Hello and welcome everybody to lesson 4 of our diploma in mobile app development. Today we are going to be looking at the development lifecycle, which is hugely important because it allows you to spend your time, your resources, and invest them wisely rather than wasting time by figuring out what to do, where you need to go next. Following the development lifecycle, proper planning will help you along. And as I've said, if you fail to prepare, you would prepare to fail, as the saying goes. So this is what it's all about. Now, I am, as usual, Ushin, your mad educator, and it would be great, guys, if you could type in where you are listening from, if you can hear me. Let's get started with a quick recap of lesson 3, which was coding with beginners. So we started learning to code with our Zoo app. So we started off with that. We learned some coding terminology. We had a look at statements, variables, as well as comment, and then as well looking at the logic behind it by looking at if statements, which are a very important control flow statement. And if you do have any questions on the lesson, do get them typing in now. And remember what a control flow statement does. It controls the flow of execution of the code. So we have either if else statement. So two options available to us depending if conditions are fulfilled. Then we started off with adding the design to our app, so the user interface, and then finally we started creating the blocks which control the logic of what happens behind the scenes. And then finally we got it up and working on our emulator and a look at what we could do to take the app further and add more functionality, which is what we will be doing today, adding more and more functionality as the weeks go by. Fantastic stuff. So there doesn't seem to be too many questions, and we will have a Q&A at the end, followed by our summary and Q&A at the end. And guys, if I'm not answering your question right at the moment, it is because we do have a lot of content to get through, and I want to keep the questions on topic. So let's take a quick look at what we will be covering in today's lesson, the development lifecycle. So as I said, this is really important. Because to me, one of the most important parts of development, if not the most important part of development, is not the coding itself, but the planning and structuring of development as a whole. The amount of times I've plunged head first into coding without fully understanding what I was trying to do, without structuring my code, without planning, and at the end of it found myself with a mess of code that doesn't work because I didn't fully understand what exactly I was trying to do. So it is very important to plan down to the smallest detail possible, because when you are developing, it is like building a house. You do need a blueprint before you lay the first brick. So we will be looking at software development lifecycle models, which allow you to stay focused, give you clearly defined goals and stages to go through, and generally stop you getting lost during the development process. So in this software development lifecycle, it is a bit like a roadmap. And I really would stress, I have many friends who work for big companies in development, and they would stress that planning it out is very important if you're working on large projects, because again, you do need to figure out what you're doing and have that written down, because if you just try and go at it from scratch, you will get lost. You will get stuck down the many crossroads, and you will get stuck at the many crossroads that you will encounter. Then we'll have a look at the iterative process next, which is part of many agile methods that are popular in development at the moment and will help you develop your app faster. Then we will start back with the coding and introduce you to more concepts and ideas that you will encounter in whatever language you are developing. And then finally we will have a look at what we can do to take it further and take the next step with that, followed by a summary and our Q&A at the end. So I've seen a couple of people there saying they're familiar with agile methods. That's fantastic to hear, because they are very useful. So if anybody has any questions on that, please do type them in now, and there doesn't seem to be too much popping in, and our fantastic support staff will get your questions as well. Fantastic. So let's get going. Everybody is ready to start. Go. Brilliant. The yeahs are coming in. Fantastic. Let's get to it and have a bit of va-va-voom in regards to this lesson. So, a software development lifecycle. Let's start with this. And we've touched on some of these topics in a bit of detail, but let's go into even more detail and put them into context. So these are the stages that we go through when building an app. And this is called the software development lifecycle. But because all an application is a piece of software that runs on your mobile device, well, a mobile app is, we could also call this the application development lifecycle. And these are the stages that you go through when developing. And when developing, the more time that you spend on the first two stages, as we can see there, we have requirements analysis and design, the less time you will have to spend on other stages such as implementation, testing, and evolution. So the requirements analysis and design are so important. I cannot stress how important they are. Because it makes every other stage easier. It's kind of like a breakfast. A good breakfast sets you up for the day, and it can be similar to laying the foundations of a house as well. It sets you up for the rest of it. So it's very important. A good requirements lesson and a good design requirements analysis and a good design stage set you up for the rest of the development lifecycle. Now, this is very much 5 stages. Sometimes you see a software development lifecycle with 7 stages, 8 stages, and in fact, the whole MAD process we are following, our MAD agenda, which is design, develop, and distribute, very much falls into this category. So we have our design, our develop, and then our distribute as well. So first of all, we have our requirements analysis, and this is where we come up with our initial idea, and then it is in this stage that we analyze our idea. So we've come up with our elevator pitch, and hopefully everyone has that done at this stage, and we saw it in the last lesson. So this is where we analyze our idea and extract, or try to extract, every single scenario in which our app can be used, what ways it will be used, and what way users want to use the app. And this is done through use cases and user stories, and I do talk a lot more about them in the advanced course, but very simply, a use case is one way a function in your app will be used. Say for instance, sign in, log in, search, favorite. Those are use cases. While a user story is a short story, a paragraph of how that particular function will be used. And this is very useful because it gives you an idea, a model of how your app is going to be used. And extracting all of this is done through conversations with people when you're figuring out your users, and it allows you to start the design stage with clearly defined functions in mind, the usage of these functions, and overall clearly defined goals in regards to what your app is going to achieve, how it is going to achieve it, that you can then start designing for. So again, there can be quite a bit of work in the requirements analysis, and it's very much figuring out exactly what you are trying to do, how you are going to do it, why you are going to do it in a certain way, and everything like that. And then you move on to the design stage, where you start designing for the functions, the functionality that you have extracted in your requirements analysis stage. And when I talk about design, I would really like to stress, and we'll see it in the next slide, that I don't just mean the design of the user interface. The design of the user interface is very important, but by design I also mean the structure of the app. How many screens is it going to have? How many functions are there going to be on each screen? And what will those functions do? Your system architecture as a whole. So let's go back to building a house analogy. The requirements analysis is like talking to the clients or whoever it may be about what they want from the house, while the design stage is where you start drawing out the blueprints. And one does naturally follow on from the other. If you don't have enough detail from talking to the clients, you will not be able to draw out a satisfactory blueprint in the design stage. So the more detailed the blueprints are, the better, and the more detailed your requirements analysis stage is, the better. So continuing with the analogy, when drawing up a blueprint for the house, you do want to have the exact dimensions for everything. You want to have the layout of the plumbing, the wires, what goes where, how many doors, how many rooms, and from that you know how many bricks you're going to need, what materials you are going to need in this. And this is the sort of detail you should be looking for when developing an app. A broad overview isn't enough. Your elevator pitch is a great starting point, but a broad overview just isn't enough because, again, there's so many crossroads that you can come to when developing, and figuring out what you're doing at the start gives you a map so that you can have a straight path to development rather than getting diverted, going up dead ends and barking up the wrong tree overall. So you do want to figure out what functions and what sections of code you will have in the app that do specific jobs. This is all done in your requirements analysis and your design stage. And then from there you move on to your implementation stage, and as you can see, sitting in front of a computer working away, this is where you start coding up everything. And again, if you've your requirements analysis stage and your design stage done very much done well, it very much means that when you are working away, you could have your project beside you saying, the next thing I need to do is this. And then once you've completed that, the next thing I need to do is this section of the app. And then when you've completed that, you know that the next section of the app that you have to complete is on the page beside you, and you can work from that rather than completing a section and trying to figure out what you have to do, what you need to do to make it work overall. So it can be pretty much following the blueprint and the instructions you've given yourself in the previous two stages. Sounds like a lot of detail there from Ken. Well, Ken, as you're starting out, I have been stressing that you do want to go into the tiniest detail. And that is brilliant to do. But at the same time, that is not always possible, and there are occasions when you aren't 100% on a specific detail. So I am saying that the best way to do it is have as much detail as possible, and that's quite a good question. But at the same time, as a starting out developer, keep this in mind when you are working through your project. Keep this in mind when you are developing your app, because it makes it easier. And how much detail you want to go into is really up to yourself. But I do get emails over from students asking me, I want to do this, I want to do that, and they haven't gone through the first two stages, figuring out what it is they exactly want to do and how they are going to do that. So the more detail you have, the better, but at the same time, it is up to you how much detail you want to go into. So we have our implementation, which is coding it all up, and then testing. So testing is a huge thing, so you want to test a lot. And while there is the emulator on App Inventor, which is a fantastic tool, I would say to everybody, do try and test on a real device, okay? Do try test on a real device, because it's real world testing, while an emulator, while very good, is only an emulator. So I will talk more about testing in lesson 6, publishing your app. And then we have our evolution. And this is where to go next. So there was quite a lot there. And what we'll do is, if everyone can hold their questions until the next slide, where we will look at it this way and break it down a little bit and make it a bit clearer, because there was a lot of information there. But again, you want to keep it all in mind. So we can look at it this way. We've got to look at our research, our design, our development, and our distribution. Again, research, come up with your app idea. You may want to research the market, see if there's a gap in the market, or if you could improve on something in the market. Then we have research our market and our users. So we've already talked about researching our market in lesson 2, and this is where you start researching the competition as well, seeing if there are apps out there similar in function. If there are, don't worry about that. You can improve on them. And then we move on to user research, and as well, we've talked about this, but it is extremely important stuff. I want you guys to remember that you are building an app for the Play Store and are looking for hundreds of thousands of downloads, and you aren't building an app for yourself. You are building it for an end user out there. So to build the app for them, you do need to talk to potential users, do surveys, extract user stories and use cases that you can then analyze in the requirements analysis stage. So you move on to the requirements analysis stage, go over all the data that you've gathered and start extracting what exactly is required from your app to fulfill everything that has come up in the research data. And then once that's all done, you can move on to the design stage. And this is where all the data you've collected and analyzed lays the foundation. You start off with your app architecture. Think about the different pages in your app and the different functions. How are they going to relate to each other? How are they connected? This is where you come up with your system architecture. If you do want to do a bit more research on system on the advanced course. So I would like to stress that this isn't simply the design of the interface. This is the design of the application and its structure as a whole. Your blueprint. I keep on coming back to that idea, but it is very, very important that you keep that in mind, that it is your blueprint. Keeping that in mind, having the blueprint when building anything makes it a lot easier. If you don't have a blueprint, even the simplest thing that you're trying to build can make it a lot harder. And then once you've got that done, you can start designing for user experience. Again, I won't be covering too much about that because I do have a whole user interface and user experience semester in the advanced course. And that's a whole semester in itself. And then this is where you come up with your initial prototype. See if the architecture works, see if the user experience works, if the user interface works. And if it does, well then that's fantastic. And what you can then do is start coding it up, testing and creating and fixing bugs. So development is coding everything from the design stage up, and the more detail you have in the design stage, the easier it is to code, because you are pretty much just following instructions from this point on. Because if we want to take it all the way back to lesson 1, we talked about the MAD process, where you identify a solution, design, implement, and then test. So this is very much what we're working through here. But we talked about algorithms, and we talked about that all an application is a list of instructions to the system to do something. And an algorithm is the list of steps to complete a task. And very much, if we're trying to apply that to an app, it's much better that we come up with it in our design stage, and then when we're doing that, all we're doing is relaying instructions from ourselves to the Android system itself, to whichever system you're using, even if that's iOS, Android, cross-platform. All you're doing then is just relaying it in code form to the system. But if you don't have those instructions done in the design stage for yourself, you are going to have to come up with them while you are developing, and that can be a bit more trouble, because again, there's crossroads you can go down, different options available to you as well, so it can waste time. So testing is involved in your development as well. And then create a question there, do we create bugs on purpose? Very good point. What I mean by creating and fixing bugs is generally you create bugs unintentionally. Creating bugs is a fact of life in development, and the same with fixing them. And you learn a lot with each bug you fix. So remember, everything is a learning experience in development and does add to your overall knowledge and experience. And then we move on to distribution, which we will be talking a lot about in later lessons. So we're not going to worry about that too much. We do have lesson 6, publishing your app, in regards to that. So hopefully that's brought everything down to a nice level. Research, design, develop, and distribute. And again, it's extremely difficult if you bypass these 2 stages to get anywhere. It becomes very much a loop of you don't know where you're going, because if you haven't done any research in what you want to do, if you haven't designed what you want to do, how do you know what you're going to do itself? So let's take a look at some software development lifecycle models, and doesn't seem to be too many questions in regards to that. Prototyping. I will have a lesson on prototyping in the advanced course, a whole lesson on that again. Keep this in mind with developing, guys. It's a very good path to follow. So let's take a look at the implementation of this in a couple of different models. So this is a software development lifecycle. Let's take a look at a couple of software development lifecycle models. So first of all, we do have the waterfall model. It's a sequential design process. And progress is shown as flowing downwards through the different stages. I would like to state very, very quickly that this isn't a great model for app development. And I will tell you why in a minute. But it is a very clear-cut example to give you an idea of how development works. Very good. And it's completely saying why waterfall isn't that used anymore. So it's not used that often anymore. If it is used, certain habits of it are used, but not overall. So we start off with research and design, moving on to development, then to testing, then distribution and maintenance. So research and design, development, testing, which we had these as two similar stages in the previous slide, distribution and maintenance again. We combined these two, and actually spread these two out. Again, there is a lot of different flows to this. We wanted each of these could be 6 stages instead of 5. So it is suitable for projects where the requirements are unlikely to change. And if anyone can spot why, do pop it in there. So requirements are unlikely to change. You have a very clear-cut definition of what you're attempting to do, and the technology is understood. You're not messing with new technology or anything like that. And the project length is short as well, where you can get it done hopefully within a month or so, quite short overall. It's not suitable where technology is new, your project length is long, and this is the most important point. Requirements change frequently. So this is why it isn't very, very good, because it is sequential. So you must 100% complete your research and design stage before moving on to your development stage. You completely need to complete that stage before moving on to your testing stage. And then testing must be done 100% before moving on to distribution and maintenance. Now, this isn't great because in question there, which is pretty much the point I was going to make. If there is any bug, we need to do it all over again in the waterfall. Is that right? That is correct there, Sheik. That is very, very correct. And if there is a bug, we do need to do it all over again. If we find out in the testing stage that something's gone wrong, we need to go back to our research and design, go through development again, and then get down to testing. So it's not great for mobile app development, and I'm sure you can see why. Because requirements do change frequently. The mobile app ecosystem changes a lot, and new technologies to come out, new updates, new features in regards to that. Does the evolution includes maintenance? Evolution does include maintenance. If we want to go very back to evolution would include maintenance. So this is your updates, your maintenance, everything like that. So let us move on next. And there are some good habits that I have which you should keep in mind, some very, very good habits. It emphasizes planning in the early stage, which is not a bad idea at all. It's got good habits in regards to process visibility. You're defined before design before code. It really helps you monitor the progress against the development plan. But there's a huge difficulty accommodating change after the process is underway. The following phase shouldn't start until you've started your previous one. And in practice, these stages often do overlap and feed information to each other. So what is much better, and one final thing that is a problem with the waterfall model, is that the finished product is delivered late on in the process, which is a problem. So the final product is delivered late on the process, and then often as well, during design, problems with the requirements are identified, which means you have to go back, and then during the coding, design problems are found, so it can be an issue there. What is much more suitable is the agile model, and this is where you do increments in iterations. So it's an iterative process. So it is an iterative process. Progress is made by breaking the project into smaller increments, and then each build is provided in the next iteration. So an increment is a section of the actual product. So this can be sections of functionality. Remember, we talked about our primary requirements and our secondary requirements in lesson 2. So requirements could be considered to be our increments, the sections of functionality, and which you can then separate, and what you can do is work on a couple of increments per iteration. And an iteration is a new version of the overall whole. So generally speaking, the first iteration has the most increments, as this is going to be the foundation of your app. It's going to have the most functionality. It's everything you need to get it up and running, and the minimum viable product that you're trying to get out there. And then iterations afterwards may deal with less increments, because you may be only adding on 1 or 2 functions at a time. So is everyone okay with that? So it is suitable for projects where the product definition is likely to change, the project length is medium. It's not suitable where the breakdown of tasks is unclear and commitment to deadlines is poor. So let's take a look at this in an example. So what's the difference between an increment and an iteration there from Jane? Well, okay, so an increment is a section. And we're going to see now a little diagram here, but an increment is a section. So what you can do with your app idea is break it down into sections that need to be completed. So different functions. Maybe you need to have 3 different screens that all do different things. Each of them could be an increment, or each of those screens could be even broken down further into further increments that you could work on. Well, an iteration, if for you to get your app out there as a minimum viable product, it only needed 2 of the screens to be working, with about half of the functionality on each of those screens. Well, then you could put all the increments that you need to do, in the all the sections that you need to do to get your first iteration out, your minimum viable product, into that first iteration, and then work from there. And then each new iteration that you're going to do, add in the other increments that you haven't as of yet done. So an increment is a section, while an iteration is the overall whole. So let's take a look at it here. So we have iteration 1, where we research, design, develop, release. And what we could do is, if we wanted to imagine it, say for our app, for our first iteration, this would be our MVP, our minimum viable product. So this would be our MVP, first iteration. Maybe there was 3 separate sections of functionality that we needed to get to actually get an MVP out there. And an MVP is, the minimum product that you need to have to actually get it out there. And a lot of mobile apps do work on that basis, because you do want to get it out there to keep up with the market. So your first iteration could be your MVP, and maybe there was 3 increments in that, 3 separate sections of functionality that you need to get done. So we're going to have our first increment, 1 section, 2, 3. So these are blocks of functionality that you need to get done. Now, there could be a whole separate list of another 10 bits that you would like to add on in other iterations, which you could bring on. So we want to have some more up there, There's quite a few more up there in your sort of project backlog that you would like to have in your app. And then we have our second iteration, where again we research, design, and develop, and you can start bringing in these other increments that you've yet to do but want to add in updates. Now we could have a third iteration of research, design, and develop in each of them. And what is great about this is that, first of all, if you know that the first 3 increments you want to have done, the first 3 bits of functionality, you can research, design, and develop and release them without worrying too much about the other ones. And the brilliant thing about the Agile model and what makes it so suitable for app development is the emphasis is on building releasable software, a releasable app in short time periods. And the emphasis is also on working software as your measure of progress. So rather than in the waterfall stage, which we saw, having our completing a stage being the measure of progress, actually having working software as a measure of progress and building that software that you can release in a short time period. So we do have a couple of questions there. So is this the same agile method used in project management? I would believe so. It is very prominent and it has been around for a while. And within each iteration there could be a mini waterfall model. There could indeed be. There could of course. And the Agile model is easier than the waterfall model. It is adaptive to change, and this is the really important thing. In the Agile model, it's not a strict methodology as such. It's not something you have to stick to strictly. The whole point of it is that you try and adapt to change, which can happen very quickly in mobile app development. You may figure out a better way of doing something. You may want to do something differently in response to something you've researched. You need to be able to adapt to that change very quickly. So, we do still have quite a bit to get through, guys, and so I do apologize if I'm not answering all of your questions. We still need to get onto the coding section, which we will be on in a minute. So, Agile model. It goes for rapid development. It goes for rapid development, working software as a measure of progress. There is cooperation of various roles if you're working in a team, and a regular adaptation to change in circumstances, which is quite important. So, as I said, it's more of a concept for development, not a strict methodology. Do try and adapt and embrace change. If a team, or if you yourself, stops and reevaluates the direction of the project every 2 weeks, there's always time to steer it in another direction. So what is great to use is Trello. It's a free-to-use app and website, and what it allows you to do is keep track of your progress, break down big problems into small tasks, which is very important because you want to break things down into increments and break those increments down in even further so you can tackle a lot of small tasks rather than one big huge problem. And it makes rapid development quite achievable, which is very useful. So Trello, search it online, you can find it there. Another good task management system is Jira by Atlassian. That's a very good point there, Kyle. And thanks for popping that. There is a lot of other project management software out there. Whichever one you prefer to use, it is really up to yourself. Trello is just a free one that is out there and available to you. So the waterfall model, it is simple and easy to implement, easy to manage each stage of development, and each phase does have a set of deliverables, and each stage is clearly laid out. But again, can be a bit of a problem. So, just a quick recap on software development life cycles. What they do is they help break down your project into manageable tasks. And that is one reason for them. Rather than having a big problem in front of you and going for the big bang approach, which is trying to get everything working at the end, in one big bang, you run it and see if it all works. You break down everything into manageable tasks. Choosing one that suits your app speeds up the development process and gives you clear goals at each stage. So it gives you something to aim for at each stage that is manageable. The more information you have before starting development, the better. And as you are probably not part of a huge team, It's not like you have to be super exhaustive when creating your development lifecycle, but it is a very good idea to give yourself some form of structure, and structure is very important. It's much better to take a few days or a week or two trying to figure out what you're attempting to do rather than rushing in head first, and in 2 weeks having everything all muddled together. You end up with just a mess of code that doesn't work, and you're not entirely sure what you're trying to do in the end. So the more information you use before you start coding, the better. And if you've gathered and elicited all the user stories and requirements, analyzed them properly, and from that gotten your system design and architecture, everything after that is just following blueprint. Now there are a lot of more software development life cycles, but I can't spend the entire lesson on them. Good question there from Marie. Is Trello useful if it's just you? It is still very useful if it is just you. It's fantastic because it means you can just, again, you've projects, you've deadlines, things to work to. Rather than trying to figure out what you're doing, you have a list of tasks there that need to be completed in a certain amount of time. Does anyone have any other questions on that? Which one would I recommend, the Agile model or the waterfall model? I would recommend the Agile model, but again, bring it back to the first couple of slides. Look at your software development life cycle. Keep those stages in mind when you are working on a project. When you do encounter a problem, do try and do as much research and design at the start. But maybe that's not always possible. So when you do reach a stage in development that you're unsure what you're attempting to do, how to do it, rather than just rushing into it and trying to get it done, do take a step back and follow those stages again. Research what you're doing, find out what exactly you're trying to do, your requirements analysis, and from that design how you're going to do it, and then you can implement that and continue on. Well, that took a bit longer than I expected, guys, so I do apologize. I'll try very quickly move on here. So learning to code, and I'd just like to say that programming, again, it does take practice and effort, time with it. It's the same as any other skill, guys. You do need to put practice in. No one is a world-class guitarist the first time they pick up a guitar, and no one can play the piano perfectly the first time they sit down at the piano. It's the same with coding things up. So do enter with the understanding you are learning a new language, a new process, a new skill. It does take time to become a professional at that, and bring yourself up to a high level. But if you are putting in the time, the dedication, you will be able to create very good apps in a lot sooner than you would expect. So let's open up App Inventor and talk about what we are going to be doing today. So in the last lesson, we talked about what we would like to add in today's lesson. So we want to have a bit more interactivity. It's not great having all of the animals already unlocked, and I'm pretty sure you all agree. QR scanner, very good bet, and that's it exactly. The QR scanner, a barcode scanner, scanning to unlock the animals. It has that interactive element, a bit of a treasure hunt element, so that users do have to go around the zoo, find the animal enclosure, and then unlock the animal. And there are a couple of ways we could do this. We could use a geofence if we wished, in that once a user enters a certain area, it will become unlocked. But that would require constant internet access, which maybe they don't have. So what might be an option, and what I was thinking, is imagine the situation where there is a barcode beside the animal enclosure, the little animal description, and when the user gets there, they can scan that barcode to unlock the animal. And we'll work with that. So we do have quite a bit to get through. So guys, if you could hold your questions to the Q&A, that would be absolutely fantastic. So let's get started by uploading our unlocked bear image. So this is where becoming a graphic designer can be hugely useful. Again, all these images, or even having a bit of graphic design skill can come in very useful, because again, all these images were done by our graphic design educator, Kevin, who has many years experience in the field. So that is our locked bear. So the user will have to now scan to unlock that, and to scan we would need a barcode scanner. So we'll click and drag that in, rename it to something logical, animal scan. So that is everything we have to do here. Now you may notice over in the properties we have use external scanner, which we can click or not. It might be an idea to have use the internal scanner, the whatever scanner comes naturally, comes preloaded with the device. It might be an idea as well to use external scanner, as the quality of the internal one mightn't be the best. So QR Droid is a great one to download, and as you can see here, QR Droid scanner. Now when the user is downloading the app, in your app description on the Play Store, you would mention the fact that this application needs an external QR barcode scanner to function. You could include the link to QR Droid if you wished. It really depends, and generally a lot of devices have their own external scanner as well. It's an option for you, so it might be an idea to do that, purely because the external scanner would be of a higher quality. So let's get cracking with that. This is everything we've done. I've already ran through all our code. So when our bear button is clicked, what we want to do is provide the option to the user, if it's not unlocked, well then we need to provide the user with an option to scan the barcode that we would presume is going to be beside the bear enclosure, so they can scan it when they do reach the bear, when they reach the elephant, when they reach the fox, whatever it may be. So we want to take that out. So we are going to use an if statement for this that we saw in the last lesson and covered. So if, what we want to do is a bit of logic. We want to compare our two options. So what we want to do is, if our bear button dot image is equal to bear dot png, the unlocked image, the normal image, not the silhouette, well then we can open up our other screen because it is unlocked. And this is where control flow statements come into play, splitting up the flow of execution depending on the different options that are there. Otherwise, we want to use our notifier again, and this time we're going to, rather than showing a message dialog or a text dialog, we're going to show a choose dialog to give the user a bit of choice. And we're going to set that to false so they can't cancel it, and we'll see why in a second. So our title, our message, in fact we'll start off with our title, duplicate that. So our title, a couple of question marks might be an idea. And then what we could do for this is scan bar code beside bear enclosure to unlock bear info. And we give them a question mark saying that this is what they need to do. And then we're going to have two button text, and we can have our yes and our no. Maybe the user isn't beside the bear enclosure, and again we're providing them with information that they need to go to the bear enclosure to find the barcode to unlock the bear. So is everyone okay with that? So if our bear button on an image is equal to the bear PNG to our first image, well, then we can open up the screen normally. Otherwise, give the user an option to open up the scanner. And what we want to do then is, after choosing, after they've made their choice, we need a couple of more options. We need another control flow statement. So we need another if statement. We're going to compare the text here. So we're going to say that if the choice, we can get our choice there, is equal to yes, well then what we want to do is we want to actually call our animal scan to do a scan. So this will open up the scanner. And we don't need any other choice there, because otherwise it will just close automatically. We have an OK with that. So after the user has made their choice, if it's yes, we're going to check to see what the text choices are and say yes, and then call animal do scan. What might be an idea, if we do so wish, is to provide a bit of more information to the user. If they pick no, we could again call our notifier, show a little message if we wanted, saying go to the bear enclosure and go to the bear enclosure to find the barcode scanner, which would be beside the bear. But we don't really need that at the moment. It's explanatory enough. So then the final thing we need to do is actually check what we have scanned. And we do that with our after our scan. So after our scan, we have gotten a result. Could you use the barcode scanner for anything in a supermarket or anything like that? And I would like to say, okay, and this is an important concept to get in mind, that when you scan a barcode, the barcode itself does not have any intrinsic information. I remember for a long time I used to think that the stripes contained information and the numbers contained information that the barcode scanner deciphered to produce information on a product, whatever it may be. The information is actually held in a database. It's compared against something. So barcode, the numbers and the stripes are compared against previous data that is already there. There's no intrinsic information contained in a barcode on its own. And we'll see that now. So we want to use another if statement here. So if our result, and we're going to say contains text. So if it contains, and we want to have our text, which is the result, and contains a piece. So if it contains 000. So if the barcode contains 000 that we've just scanned, which is our result, after scan we get a result. This is what is returned from the scan. We have a result. If it contains 000, then what we can do is we can then set our bear button dot image to bear.png or bear.png image to show that we have unlocked it. And we could add another bit of text saying congratulations if we've unlocked it, or better luck next time, try a different enclosure or a different barcode. So this is what I mean. We have to provide the information to the barcode scanner after it scans to test against the result, and this is the same for any barcode out there. A barcode itself does not contain any intrinsic value. It is just a collection of numbers, and after you've scanned it, you do need to compare the collection of numbers against some further information, and in this case, if it contains 000. And again, I would like to say that it's not necessarily 3 zeros in a row, it's just if it contains 3 zeros overall. And that is our scanner done. So what I will do is I will get our emulator up and running. We can see that in action now in a second. Now I would like to say, because we are working with barcode scanner, you cannot scan on the emulator, and this is something to keep in mind, okay? And that you cannot scan on the emulator, you cannot take photos on the emulator, geolocation can be hard to simulate on the emulator, which is why overall it's much better to test on a real device. Not to worry, we still have a bit to get through, guys. We still have a bit more coding to get through. So let's talk about loops, okay? Loops are another very important control flow statement that we will be using and that are used quite commonly in mobile app development, okay? They're very, very common in mobile app development. So let's start off with this statement that computers are fast. They are very, very fast. They are way faster at doing calculations than we are, and that is why we do loops, because they will do the work for us a lot quicker and in much less time than we could possibly do it. So loops are blocks of code that repeat until reaching a defined finish. And there are a couple of different types of loops. We have for and while loops. So, for loops. For each item in a list, from our get a global variable name list, which is going to be a list, and a list is just a collection of data. Do something, call activity starter 1, start an activity. And this could be to do anything. It could be to send all those people in a list a text message. It could be to sort each of those people in the list alphabetically. It could be to find out and delete the people out of the list whose names begin with a G. It could be to find a person in a list whose name is Paul, and so on. They're extremely important for going through large amounts of data. So for each item in a list, address list, whatever it may be, send a message. So a good instance of a loop in action is sending a mass email. Looping through a list of email addresses and sending an email template to each email addresses is much quicker than sending the emails individually. And the same with if statements, guys. Loops are extremely powerful, and we'll see them soon. So they are blocks of code that repeat the statement of executable code until they reach a defined finish. They just do very tedious tasks for us very quickly. They also allow us to sort through data very, very quickly as well. And then we have while loops. And while loops do something while a condition is until a condition is met. So what we're doing there is while, and then we test our condition. This is referred to as our condition. We test a variable global dice roll to see if it's not equal to 6. And each time it is not equal to 6, what we do is set it to a random integer between 1 and 6. So while our roll is not equal to 6, which is the condition, do get a random number. But be wary of infinite loops, okay? This is quite important. Be wary of infinite loops, and they have no end because their start conditions are poorly defined. So say, for instance, if this was not equal to 7, we would never reach a case where dice roll would be set to 7, and it would just loop forever. So they are control flow statements, but they do serve, so they're like if then else statements. They are control flow statements in the same way, but they do serve a very different purpose. Okay, so I have actually run a bit over time with today's lesson, guys, so let's very quickly move on to the Q&A. So do post your elevator pitch for a holiday themed app under hashtag #ShowMadApp. Today we had a look at software development life cycles, loops, app feature integration as well. So congratulations, you have just taken the next step in Android app development, and do attend lessons live to ask questions. So the next session is storing data with apps, and this is what we need to work with. Currently, if we unlock anything in our app and then close the app down, that will not be saved. So we need to fix that. So we'll be looking at persistent data, adding a database to your project, learning to code as well, and taking it further after that.